Chapter 2. Hidden Camera. The three girls rejoined Mr. Moto, who had turned very pale. Nancy was afraid he might have another attack. She suggested that he stay on the couch while the girls made a further search for the person who had spoken. He agreed, but said he did not want to close the shop. "With these losses, I cannot afford to prevent customers from coming in," he explained worriedly. Bess offered to work in the store for him. "I would enjoy selling somebody a diamond engagement ring or a wedding ring," she said, her eyes twinkling. The jeweler smiled faintly. "Some time ago I had a special camera put in to take pictures of anyone who seemed suspicious. This neighborhood is not as high class as it used to be, and sometimes I have dishonest people coming in." He got up and showed Bess where the camera was located in a corner of the ceiling. It pointed directly toward the counter. "There is a button under the counter," he said. "If you press it, the camera will take a picture instantly and develop it. See, here it is." Bess nodded, sat down on a high stool behind the counter, and gazed at the display before her. Mr. Moto went to lie down again, and when Bess looked at him a few minutes later, he was sound asleep. She smiled and returned to the shop. Meanwhile, Nancy and George had gone to hunt for the source of the voice. They could find no shoe prints of the eavesdropper and no noticeable fingerprints. George walked up the driveway between Moto's shop and the next store and questioned pedestrians on the street. None had seen anyone entering or leaving the alleyway. Then she asked people if a man had lingered near the jewelry shop. In each case, the answer was no. Nancy inquired in apartments above the stores. Most of the tenants were apparently out because they did not answer their doorbells. The few who were home had seen nothing. She returned to the rear of the jewelry shop. When Nancy looked up, she noticed a young woman leaning out of a window. Nancy called up to her. "Did you by any chance see a man loitering around Mr. Moto's place?" "When?" the woman asked. "Oh, a little while ago, about 20 minutes, the young sleuth replied. "Yes, a fellow was standing by the back door. He spoke to someone inside." "He must be the one," Nancy said. "What did he look like?" The neighbor said she could not see him too well from upstairs. "He was rather short and stocky, had very black hair, and wore a gray suit. I'm afraid that's all I can tell you." "It's a wonderful identification." Nancy smiled. "By the way, was he of Asiatic origin?" The woman shook her head. "I couldn't see his face, but I don't think he was." She asked if something was wrong. Nancy replied that the man had called into the shop, then disappeared. This answer seemed to satisfy the woman, and Nancy was glad she did not have to go into further details. The young sleuth now turned up the driveway and met George in the street. "Any luck?" she asked. "None," George replied. "How about you?" Nancy told her about the clue she had just picked up. Then the girls began questioning passers-by, but no one had seen the mysterious stranger. The two sleuths were about to give up when they saw a woman with a large package walking toward a parked sedan. To Nancy's inquiry, she answered, "Yes, a man fitting that description ran up the alleyway just as I parked my car." "Did you see his face?" George inquired. "Can you tell us what nationality he was?" The woman smiled. "He appeared to be of Italian descent." Nancy and George were thrilled by this additional information. Now they had something to work on. "Did you see where the man went?" George asked as she helped the woman put her package into the car. Yes, he jumped into a black sedan that somebody else was driving, and they sped off in a hurry. Thank you very much, Nancy said. We're trying to locate this man, and your information will help. Before the stranger could become inquisitive, the girls turned and walked to the rear of the shop again, letting themselves in through the back door. Meanwhile, Bess had had an adventure of her own. A rather large, mannish-looking woman with an abundance of blonde hair exaggeratedly coiffed had briskly walked into the store. She came up to the counter and said in a harsh voice, "Please give me Mrs. Rossmeyer's address in Europe." Bess did not like her customer. She seemed hard and cruel. "I don't know the address," the girl replied. "Oh, come on now," the woman said. "If you work here, you certainly must know what address Mrs. Rossmeyer left with Mr. Moto. I'm a friend of hers, and am going abroad. I want to look her up." "I'm really sorry," Bess replied, "but I truly don't know it. Why don't you come back some other time and talk to Mr. Moto?" The stranger was annoyed. "Where is Mr. Moto? Get him! He'll give it to me." Bess was beginning to worry. The woman did not look or act like a nice person, and she felt that giving her any further information might not be in the best interest of either Mrs. Rossmeyer or Mr. Moto. She said, "Please come back another day, perhaps tomorrow." "But I must have the address today," the woman insisted. Bess was not sure she knew how to handle the situation. Finally, she said, "I'll tell Mr. Moto you were here. What's your name?" The stranger grew red in the face with anger. "That's none of your business." "She's not honest," Bess thought frantically. "She's trying to hide something." With trembling fingers, the girl reached under the counter and pushed the button that operated the camera on the ceiling. Trying hard to conceal her nervousness, Bess said, "If you won't leave your name, what shall I tell Mr. Moto?" "Never mind, but you'll be sorry for your stubbornness, you silly girl." With this, the woman turned and hurried out the door. For a moment, Bess stared after her, shocked and surprised. Then she sank down on the stool, trembling. Just then, Nancy and George returned. Having found Mr. Moto sleeping, they tiptoed through the back room into the shop. "Oh, am I ever glad to see you," Bess said, her voice shaking. "What's the matter?" George asked, alarmed. Bess poured out her story. When she told about taking the woman's photograph, Nancy said, "Good for you! Maybe the police can identify this person. From what you say, I doubt that she's really a friend of Mrs. Rossmeyer's." The other girls agreed. Bess looked toward the camera. Who's going to climb up there and get the picture? George seemed the most likely candidate, but try as she would, she was unable to reach the camera. At this moment, Mr. Moto walked into the shop. He looked refreshed, and color had come back to his face. He gazed up at George, who was stepping on one shelf and trying to reach another. What are you doing?" he asked in a puzzled voice. "Bess took a picture of a woman who claimed to be a friend of Mrs. Rossmeyer's. How do you get it?" Mr. Moto smiled. "I will bring a ladder." He disappeared into the back room and, in a few seconds, returned with a tall, narrow ladder. It had a hook at the end that fitted over the shelf beneath the camera. "Push that lever on the right," he directed. "The picture will come out the front." George did this, and a photo appeared. She pulled it out, then descended the ladder. She laid the snapshot on the counter, and they all gazed at it. "It's an excellent likeness," Bess remarked. Mr. Moto said, I do not recognize the woman. You say that she claimed to be a friend of Mrs. Rossmeyer's? Yes, Bess replied, and explained what had happened. But I don't believe she was telling the truth. She was horrid. I do not like this, Mr. Moto said, visibly disturbed. Nancy asked the jeweler to tell them more about Mrs. Rossmeyer. She is a widow, he began, and travels in European high society. She is not sociable with River Heights people. She has a personal maid, an Asiatic who travels with her. When Mrs. Rossmeyer is at home, her maid does all the shopping, cooking, and so on. There are no other servants. Nancy felt that Mr. Moto considered the woman a little strange, but was too polite to say so. I have never seen Mrs. Rossmeyer, he went on. I only spoke to her over the telephone. The maid brought in the necklace. Mr. Moto, would you mind if we take this photograph to the police? It might be a clue to the thief who took Mrs. Rossmeyer's necklace. Mr. Moto nodded. But do not say anything about the stolen strand of pearls. I am permitting you to take this picture to the police because Mrs. Rossmeyer's life may be in danger. As the girls were ready to leave, they extracted a promise from him that he would close up his shop and go home soon. He smiled. You are so thoughtful. I appreciate all of this. I believe you will be able to solve my mystery. We certainly hope so, Nancy said. At headquarters, it did not take Chief McGinnis long to identify the woman in the photograph. Her name is Rosina Caputi, he said, and she's the wife of an underworld character known as Benny the Slippery One Caputi. What's his specialty? Nancy asked. According to the report, he's a jewel thief. Oh, Bess burst out. It seemed as if she was about to say more, but nudges from Nancy and George made her keep quiet. The three girls wondered if Caputi and his wife were connected with Worldwide Gems, Inc. While Chief McGinnis answered a phone call, Nancy whispered to Bess, You did a great job today. I think we picked up a very good clue to the mystery. End of chapter 2.